The reason why those, even a high five, will have the higher probability of failing is because when you think about where does the benefit come from a defined, where's the beauty of a defined benefit? If you're using average comp, 70% of what you're paying out as a benefit is the earnings that you have earned over those 30 years of the money you invested back here. And the idea being that if you can earn a return, we'll say it's 5% net, and if your pay raises are something less than that, you're going to be able to save enough money to pay the benefit for the now fairly extensive period where people are retired. If you get into the high five, it just changes the liability so much you can never catch up. I should say most participants, it's not an issue because most participants are kind of going to work and they're going to get a pay raise, and so it's only isolated instances, systems where they include overtime. So you look at states like the state of Idaho where they just don't include overtime. They don't really face this issue, and that's why their pension system still exists and is fully funded.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. So I have Mr. Dunbar, then Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because I have you here, I've never really thought about this issue before, the high five thing specifically, and it makes a lot of intuitive sense. One of probably the largest single defined benefit pension system in the country is the United States military, and it's based on your last rank, like your last pay grade, and you retire as a colonel, and it's not averaged. You get a percent of that colonel pay, and I'm curious how they maintain solvency. Is it? Do you have
I will. I don't know. I will look it up. If I had to guess that it's the federal government, it's probably pay as you go.
We're looking at them right here.
Well, that might be the other thing is, and this is, I don't know if we want to do this. They also have a pretty punitive system where if you don't hit 20, you just don't get anything, right? So you have to actually hit 20. So there's a lot of people that pay in until 10. This is what I'm probably going to do, and then they're done, and then they don't get any pension at all. Do any other pension systems you know of have that kind of system where it's all or nothing?
Most have a vesting period. I think this one is supposed to be 5 years, but again, it's the math kind of always works as long as the pay is fairly uniform. But I will explore explicitly those two questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Don't
Dunbar.
spend too much time on it, though.
Well, these are important. I will. Yes.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to ask what I think you answered about why wouldn't we just not include overtime? I mean, if the problem with calculating is because overtime varies widely, then why not just not include that?
That can be a solution.
Yes.
Just the way to assure solvency is to ensure average comp, because really what you want to try and get at is, and this is the discussion that's being had across all pension systems. I was just at the National Pension Forum, and the idea is, and of course some people have Social Security, some people don't, but the idea is there is 3 legs to a stool. You have Social Security, you have pension, and then you have your own savings. And so it's kind of on the person, their individual responsibility in terms of the savings they have if they are trying to achieve a certain lifestyle for the rest of their life. Pensions are really there and have been there to say we as a society don't want police officers and fire officers specifically working till they're 60 or 70 because they don't have any savings, and so they have to keep working. And that's the whole purpose behind pensions to begin with, but it's not to say if I'm making 80 grand a year when I retire, I don't need that. And there's, I always use the example of my parents that lived in Seattle, retired, and were able to live on a combination of Social Security and very modest savings on 30 grand a year. And so it's really the question of the purpose of the system. Is it to maintain a lifestyle at a level forever, or is it to provide some base level of solvency?
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
This is a fascinating one. the reality is this high 3 or high 5 really gets abused. Most of our unions, the guys that get first pick on the overtime and everything are the old guys who've been there a while. That's why when you see APD guys directing traffic down Sullivan, you know, that's the guys that are building those last years of it. Teachers do the same thing. Go out teach in the bush for 3 years, you know, and get the thing. And troopers have been that way too. So it gets really abused. The history here in our state, I wish this guy was always right, but we didn't do it right, that's for sure. So they're looking back, the contracts, these go back to Knowles years, maybe before, very generous on the benefits and so on and so forth. The actuarial thing was grossly inaccurate. They were not self-supporting. And then we had a huge national firm, great professionals,
Yep.
that did the worst job. They've been sued by 20 or 14 other states. We've sued them for hundreds of millions of dollars, and I don't know, we're getting 15 or 20 cents.
We got 400 million.
That's not where Alex worked, right?
Right, no. That was Mercer, not where I worked.
That was Mercer, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect storm. We promised more than we should have. That was not actuarially viable, had a terrible manager, you know, and then, oh, by the way, the stock market crashed. So when Pete and I, or Ethan, got to the legislature, TERS was upside down $19 billion or something like that. And during the years we were there, we paid it down $12 billion or something. You know, people tell you that the legislature just urinated away the money. We did buy down some liabilities and so on. So I don't deserve any credit for it. I don't think we do either. But the state went to a defined contribution, okay? And that basically says to the public employees and us, we're in this together. And if things don't go good and we're all suffering a bit, you know, we're all in it together. The way in a defined benefit, if they don't go well, guess what? The rest of the taxpayers get to subsidize it. And some of us would do that cheerfully, you know, and so on and so forth. But are we all in this together and bear the risk together? And your point of view that the professional managers are going to do a better job, I hope isn't true, is true in general. I am marginally smart enough to go out and put my funds with somebody that's darn good at it and has done really good by me. Your assumption is that the public employees that work for the city aren't as smart as me. That's a bad, you don't want to bet on that. Those people are really smart people, and they're capable of finding good people to manage the money if they're not good enough at it. And I want to trust them to do it. I want us to share the risk. I do not want to put all the risk on the rest of the citizens. It's just not a fair system. So I don't, and this is being done on a state level for one purpose only. The state troopers, they're having trouble keeping them because life ain't so good. Having get these remote assignments, problem with schools for the kids, whatever it all is, and they get siphoned off into other police forces, including ours, you know, and so on. So the state is considering on a one-off only to do this in another effort to retain really good people in the troopers. So, I think this is a bad idea. Not sure it's going to happen on a state level. My guess is you all support it 7 or 8 to 3 or something like that. But what I just told you is my best understanding over a long period of time, and the reasons why I think we ought to stick with what we got. Thank you.
Perfect segue for the fire chief.
I just want to reflect on a couple of things that Mr. Dyson said. One of them is actually quite important, and it would require a federal change. That these systems work well if the math is followed from the get-go. And where these systems failed was in the 1990s when the market was going up and people were making contributions. They got to 150, 200% funded. And what wasn't understood from an actuarial standpoint is that in order to absorb market fluctuations, you have to be able to go to that point and not change your benefits so that when you get a dramatic decline, you are still funded. And what Mr. Dyson said is correct. They were 200% overfunded. They're like, oh my God, let's change the formula. Let's give them more money. Brought it down to some level, and the market cratered, and all of a sudden, now they're 80% funded, and how the hell did that happen? So they work if you set the structure and you don't change it. But otherwise, human nature being what it is, that's the risk.
You get my vote if we lock him in to manage it all. At least till I'm dead. Which is not long, bro.
Dark.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Thank you, Mr. Slivka. All right, Chief, what do you got for us?
So I have 4 points that I kind of wanted to bring up. I'm going to start with attrition. Traditionally, and I'll speak mostly to the fire department, but we've seen this, as you may be aware, I used to work for public safety, so I am aware of the trooper situation and what they're dealing with over there as well. Plus, I am fairly connected with the entire fire service throughout the state, the other career departments especially. When people want to come to work for the fire department, obvious, we get lots of applicants, but what we're seeing nowadays is we used to get 1,000 applications for our academies. We get 300. So we've dropped precipitously. Two causes for that. One, the rest of the U.S. started paying their firefighters better, and we have stayed fairly stagnant when you compare it to, but we changed to a defined contribution. The other thing I want to clarify is public safety officers, the police officers, firefighters, deputy fire marshals, those groups, they do not pay into Social Security. We only, or they, actually I am one of them, but I'm in a different tier. We have our, basically they have the PERS system, and we have our own savings investments. That's it. We do not have Social Security. We haven't paid into Social Security. At the state, they have SBS. So they have a second investment system. They use SBS.
SBS is Social Security. No, it's a different.
No, SBS is a supplemental benefit system that the state offers in lieu of Social Security.
Oh, is that when you get those two? You have two different accounts.
Yes.
And one. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
So at the state, they do have there is 3 tiers to that stool. With the municipality, we don't. So everyone that we have hired since 2006 has their 401k. That's all they have for retirement, and then their personal savings. So just wanted to clarify, get us all on the same sheet of music. The other thing, Mr. Dyson and Mr. Slivka were correct with law enforcement. Overtime is granted based on seniority. Fire department is not that way. The fire department, we have a rotating system to where your name goes on the list, and it's where you are on the list on whether you're offered the overtime. That is similar to the other career departments, and that's based on our collective bargaining agreement. So we actually, my husband was in the fire department. His high 3 years were actually his years working at Station 3 as a paramedic when they were short-staffed as a firefighter paramedic, and he worked himself to the bone for about 5 years, and I think he barely covered it. His last 3 years were only marginally higher than what he had at the beginning of his career. So it is a little bit different for fire service. So let's talk about attrition. In the past, prior to, and I have studied this a lot because I did a lot of research so that I could prepare an educated letter for Representative Cobb. Prior to the implementation of Tier 4, people did not leave the fire department. You got on and hired and you stayed your 20 or 25 years. With the exception, we had some people leave who became PAs and physicians, and the only reason why they left, voluntarily left, because we had other people leave for other reasons, but they voluntarily left to pursue higher positions. We didn't have people leave within their first 5 years to go work for another fire department. Nobody left to go work for another fire department because they liked working here and it was financially beneficial for their family. Since Tier 4 has been in place, I think we are on, just in the last 4 years, we lost a 2-year, I think it's about 2.5 years to Boise. We lost another person actually to Boise. We had let's see, we have a couple people testing and on the list for Everett. But I think we have lost 6 people to other departments just in the last 4 years, which is, and it wasn't, the reason why it didn't happen before that is because the stateside economy hadn't recovered yet. So the pay disparity was a little bit different. But now that the economy has recovered stateside, it's a really lucrative package, and we're really losing people to the Pacific Northwest. Nobody really looks anywhere west of the Mississippi or east of the Mississippi, so it's Pacific Northwest where we lose people to. Right now, I just recently conducted a study, a survey with all of our people, asking them to let us know if you're testing other places. I have, I think it was 35 firefighters, 56-hour people who probably have less than 10 years on, who are testing other places. That's unprecedented. And the majority of them put that to either better pay or defined benefit system somewhere else that they can have access to. And why that's important to us is to get somebody to their journeyman, their 5-year, they complete their 48 months to where they can work independently on a scene, don't need supervision, where we can start tasking them with higher level decision making, is close to $1 million a piece. So we invest, close to $1 million in these people with training, obviously pay, all of their equipment, that takes them to get there. And that investment goes right out the door because now they can lateral into a department, and they may have to do an academy, but they come in at a higher level when they go to another department because they're already trained. So and I have had 2 fire chiefs who called me and thanked me very much for our investment. Because yes, it's a pretty small community. So that's attrition, training costs. The thing that we really haven't discussed is work comp. So average age of someone coming on the fire department is 30 years old. So to earn your retirement under Tier 1, 2, or 3, you had to stay 20 years. And then with Tier 2 and Tier 3, you had to stay 25 to get medical benefits. So I have somebody I hire at 30. They stay for 20 years is 50. That's great. That's this is really a young person's physically fit person. You're an occupational athlete. This job's hard on your body. We require a lot of people. There's actually a study out of California that between 50 and 55 on work-related injuries in the fire service start to crawl, or actually not crawl, they start to rise exponentially. So when they changed Tier 2 and Tier 3, now we're requiring people to stay 25 years. So now I have 55-year-olds on the department who are more likely to get injured and either a career-ending or a major injury. We do a lot of joints, we have a lot of shoulder replacements, we have a lot of knee injuries and back injuries. That's what we see. Those are really expensive. So that's the thing that doesn't get rolled into this whole conversation is what our work comp costs are doing. Now, with defined contribution, they'll work until they get a number in their head of how long, what they think they need for retirement. We expect people to, between 55 and 60, we're going to have people staying 60, 65. They get hurt. They are really expensive employees for injuries and work comp costs. So as the fire chief, I strongly encourage us to do something that gets people out the door at 55. We've had some people who, get close to 60 and they are physical specimens. They are able to work everybody else into the ground. They're just few and far between. We've had people stay on the department for 40 years and they do great until they're no longer doing great. And then one system goes and it just gets ugly because you replace one shoulder, that's $300,000. Replace another shoulder, another $300,000. So now they're costing us more in medical costs than we can recover for the municipality. So that's something that we have to keep in mind is the longer it takes people to get to that number that they decide in their head of when they're going to retire, the more increased work comp and injury related costs. And it's not just the medical costs. If they're not at work, I have to replace them with an overtime person. So there are those hidden underlying costs that really add up. Besides just looking at that, how much we're contributing to that defined contribution piece.
Thank you, Chief. So I have a few questions for you, starting with Mr. Dyson.
I bet you want to clone Cal Lowers, don't you? He's got to be in great shape. What is he, 60?
He's in pretty good shape. I don't want to clum in because he's also had some injuries. So he's.
Yeah, so look at the flat spots on my ears, or his elbows playing basketball.
He is a specimen. I only have one of him.
Yeah, so this lady is using the right metrics for evaluating our salary, working conditions, and benefits. How many people outside the door when you have a vacancy? What's the turnover rate? I would encourage us to run up the salaries as a portion of that solution as opposed to just doing the benefits. For us as policymakers who face the voters, it's easier to do that because the increased costs are hidden, and so on and so forth. When we pay people more, the people out there will bitch and holler and fill your email box. But that's an attractive thing, and it doesn't bury this incipient time bomb, an IED, if you will, in our retirement system. It's liable to come up and bite us, and then syndicate the risk to the other taxpayers. So, yeah. And both these groups, those guys face physical risk and situations where at a moment's notice, you're liable to be trying to drag one of your buddies in his breather tank, out of a burning building that's collapsing around them, or a cop's liable to, 55-year-old cops and liable to be rousing some drunk down here in 3rd Avenue. And those are significant risks. But I'm sorry, I'm preaching, but we need more Cal hours, and we need a better package in order to reduce the turnover and so on. And most people that retire at 50 or 55 aren't going to quit working. They're going to go on and do something else. It's not like they're out of options. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson, and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just thinking about the overtime situation that Mr. Zipkid had mentioned. And I'm wondering, is the overtime an incentive for people to work more and help you? I mean, do you have a hard time getting people volunteering to work overtime, or are they required to work overtime, or how does that work?
So we do have a mandatory callback. So how our overtime works is we have minimum staffing. We have to have enough people on staff every single day, which our minimum is 101 people. I have to have 101 bodies and seats every day so that we can keep all the rigs running. Sometimes of the year, it is fairly easy to get people, we call overtime and people will come in. Summer, basically from the beginning of May to the end of September, we have to mandatory people to show up. So it is difficult to get people to go. And unlike other lines of work, we don't have optional overtime. We don't say, people don't call and say, hey, I'm working on this special project, can I do this overtime? We rarely do that. That's because we need minimum staffing, and all of our overtime budget goes to that. Or it is definitely, there's a business case for everything that we do. So it's a little bit different. They don't volunteer to do it. It is getting harder and harder to get people to work overtime just because, last 2 weeks we had the wildland issue, and we had to work pretty hard to get people to come to work to staff those other rigs. So.
And can I follow up?
Yeah.
So what's your perspective of what he was talking about not including overtime is part of their long-term retirement?
I think that would be a really interesting, if it created some solvency and stability. I think we have people in our department who never work overtime, who would be totally on board with that. We also have some people who will take every bit of overtime that they can possibly get. So I think you get a mixed bag. My personal opinion, I'm not here about the money. I could have had other options to have a much more lucrative career than being in the emergency services. So to me, I would rather never work overtime because the time with my family and doing other things is important. Unfortunately, we have to keep the wheels rolling. And as I said, my husband was on the department, and the first 5 years he was on this department, he worked so much. I was a single parent, plus working full time, and it was really difficult. Yeah, we got money in the bank, but that money went to pay for somebody to watch our kids when he should have been home watching the kids. So I guess it's not a good answer. It really depends on the perspective of the employee, what they would think. I think it's an option we could consider.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton, then Mr. Constant.
I got a couple of things. One is for firefighters. I know what they are here. Who are the firefighters in the state? Do they have fire trucks like you?
So fire with the state is kind of interesting. The firefighters that work at the airport. So the state hires the Fairbanks International Airport Police and Fire and Anchorage, Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport Police and Fire. They hire firefighters. The Division of Fire and Life Safety, they have training people who are former firefighters, so they qualify under this plan. The deputy fire marshals around the state, so they qualify under this plan. I think everyone else are members of local government, like City of Fairbanks, Capital City Fire Department, these guys.
Well, how about the Division of Forestry people who put out that fire?
So the majority, like 95% of those people, are not classified as firefighters, and they're temporary employees, temporary seasonal employees, so they are classified differently.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Yeah.
So this talks about a pension, not health care. So your example about workers' comp, they still, and which tiers have health care?
Tier 1, 2, and 3. So in Tier 1, you work 20 years and you got the qualified for the pension at, what is it, 42%? I should know this, so I'm one. Tier 2 and Tier 3, the percentage didn't change, but you had to work an additional 5 years to qualify for state health care. And with Tier 4, the health care, you don't, even though it isn't based on the amount of time that you put in, it's based on your age. So if you retire at 55 under Tier 4, you can pay the state premium to get in the state health care. There are cheaper options. So it's an out-of-pocket expense until you hit Medicaid, and then Medicare age, then you can start paying, or they cover a portion of your health care. So it is definitely different.
Okay, but this pension thing won't really affect your issue with workers'
It should
comp.
not change. It will probably not change the health care aspect.
Commissioners make a different point. Right. Okay, so
It's really they just
then in others you used to have 1,000 applicants, now 300, but you're only filling 25 spots. So 300 should be plenty. I mean, how big is your academy usually?
So in the past, our academy is the same number, anywhere from 15 to 30 when we got 1,000 applicants.
Right.
So our pool was much bigger. So cream of the crop was a totally different. We had I'm not going to say a better group of people to pick from, but we had more better people to pick from. So our applicant pool was much better, deeper. We had more paramedics, more people with other skills. Now we have 300 people, a vast majority of which are repeat applicants who for some reason cannot pass. So probably 30 to 40% of that 300 are previous applicants that just haven't quite figured it out to get hired by us yet.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Constant.
Thanks. Yeah, I think maybe what the chief was suggesting with the issue of the healthcare costs, it wasn't about the potential of somebody staying on a state healthcare program, but rather as they get older, they become more expensive just by the virtue of their aging. And if you're insolvent, not able to retire, you're going to stay working longer. But if you have a defined benefit, then you can count on that more than you can on the power of compounding interest held by some third party somewhere. And so I think that was the benefit she was talking about, not so much that they would be able to stay on the state plan.
Yes.
My question is around, similar to what was asked about the overtime question, but the other version that was suggested by Mr. Slivka, which was the lifetime average versus the high five. What are your thoughts about that?
I think whatever we can do to make the plan solvent so that we're not confronting this situation every 5 years would be good. I think it's something we should look at.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. I don't see any more questions. Thank you, Chief. So, any final thoughts, Mr.
Matters.
Constant?
I think I'm more apt to, rather than do an S version, redo this document and reintroduce it with a couple of changes. The change that I would add would be a whereas about how we strongly support inclusion of the lifetime average model. I get that language from Mr. Slivka, so that we ensure that we are recommending a viable option, and then I'm up to hearing other people.
Okay, so I have Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Peterson, and then Ms. Kennedy.
Following up on Chris's comment, I say go with the S version. You pull out the specific mention of HB 79, except in the title, because if we do have another whereas, and I would certainly do an amendment if someone else does it, just with a comment on we got to make sure this thing stays solved,
Right.
with some of the points that Alex made, which makes it not equal to HB 79, but I think still valuable messaging to the legislature. We want this, but make sure it has these features.
I briefly respond.
Sure.
And I'm uncomfortable with the title referencing HB 79, but we can't, according to Dean, take the title out in the process where it stands, which then, if we were to strip that out, we just would introduce it new for the next meeting. Well, I guess it's in a resolution though, right?
Yeah.
So we could lay it on the table.
So, did you have anything further, Mr.
You know,
Weddleton?
this is a resolution regarding HB 79, and so if it's in the title, I mean, I think that's fine.
You're comfortable.
But we're not in the whereas saying, we totally support it, we totally support it, we totally support it. That's our risk, because it could morph into something we don't want in any way, shape, or form. So I'm not uncomfortable with it. The title, the message is, here's what we're talking about, but here's some, if we like these things, we're worried about these. So I like the S with some amendments.
But if you're
Looks a little
comfortable,
symbolic to me.
I'm comfortable.
Totally
Hey,
Good job.
But it's not political.
Oh, now it's our job to be symbolic.
Okay,
So funny.
all right.
So then what we will do is work out some language for an amendment.
This is different.
And we'll run it through.
Okay, let me hear from some others. Mr. Peterson.
People in
Thank you,
different bodies
Mr.
do
Chairman.
something.
And the situation is that there is no gigantic hurry on this. This is not part of the call of the special session.
No.
The legislature will not be taking up this until next January. So we have plenty of time to bring on a new version, whether it includes HB 79 or not. And so
Yeah.
and as a matter of fact, if we did it later in the year, it might be more effective if we pass something like this shortly before they left to go to Juneau for their next session, rather than doing it now, and they have 6 months to forget about it.
Yeah. So the chair of our legislative committee reminds us about timing and how important timing is. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still kind of mulling a lot of this over. I'm glad we have some time to think about it, because I'm not really sure how I feel about it all, because there are so many components to all of this, in terms of the big picture. But I am very hesitant to try to support a particular House bill, especially for the reasons that have been stated. You never know what it's going to end up looking like when it's all said and done. The concept itself, I think, is intriguing. So I think there are a lot of things that could be done with this kind of concept if you work out all of the details that we maybe don't like, or things that might not work so well for us in a municipality as it might be trying to work with the state. I think of that just in terms of absolutely being very different funding sources anyway from where this kind of, where this would be funded from. So I hesitate with a lot of that too. But I think if we did wait on it, I think there's still going to be some questions in terms of what this really does look like. So that's what I struggle with, is at what point could I support this? Because right now, I really would hesitate to support it. But I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to get to that point where I could.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
Oh, can I, one more?
Sure.
I just want to say, one of the comments made about how everybody kind of pads their salary or whatever, that last 3 years, 5 years, it's not just an APD or AFD thing. It happens in a lot of other organizations as well. So there are retirement systems that I can tell you, my husband working for FedEx, believe me, there's a lot of conversations about how to use the system, all legally. It's all by contract, it's all legal, but they definitely, everybody figures out how to get that highest rate going into those last 5 years or 3 years if it were. But anyway, so it's not just a municipal employee thing, it's even in the private sector. So.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I don't know, is there a meeting of that legislative committee planned?
No, they meet at will.
Right, and so maybe that could be the committee that does the final wordsmithing.
Okay, so a reference to your committee, Mr. Peterson. Did you have something to add, Mr. Willis?
Well, sort of. I think two things. One, I've been trying to pad my income every year all my life. Not everyone did that.
You did it legally.
But as far as peace, so I mean, this may not be introduced, but don't you legislators work all year on these things? So it could be Chuck Kopp's meeting with firefighters and police and actuaries and stuff is still working on this. So to give some guidance, particularly that we are really worried about solvency, it's valuable now rather than might be the last minute doing it in January.
Right, and so if they're in the process of making changes to this bill, the later we wait, it gives us an opportunity to see what potential changes could be coming so that we can decide whether that's something we want to support or advocate for or be against.
Then it's just symbolic. I want to give them guidance now to say, head this way, because this is what would be useful for us. So for me, earlier is better than.
Sure.
I would
Mr.
agree.
Constant on
In
that?
fact, I would offer that if the committee does want to tackle it, maybe in the next couple of weeks, and that way we don't put it off too long, get it back up on the agenda sooner than later. Because if it's going to wait too long, I'm probably going to just introduce it again. I want it to move.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, there's some real wisdom here. Happens to be Chuck Kopp was my chief of staff for 5 years. And as you all know, if you read the newspapers, they're all wrapped up in a whole bunch of stuff, and they're going to be wrapped up in that for the next 3 or 4 weeks, and they're going to have 8 weeks of anger management.
Detox.
And so,
Yeah.
but I'll probably talk to Chuck in the next few days, and I'll get a read from him on where he thinks the bill is. My guess is it's on no one's radar screen, and I'll see what he thinks are the chances of it. And even though I probably won't support it, he has a lot of credibility with me, and I'll give you an accurate response on where he sees that going, which will then feed into our decision process.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr.
I would
Constant.
just offer that it's on a few radar screens. Mine, for right now, ours, I know the fire service, the members of the front line, it's on their mind. And so, even if it isn't on Juno's mind, there's a lot of things that aren't on their mind that they ought to be taken on. So, just going to keep it up until we get there.
And that's great. But just because this is precluded for us doesn't mean we can't take the initiative to work on their salary, even out of contract time. I mean, it doesn't have to be on that. And if we really care about these guys, there's other things we can add to it that, from my perspective, would be a better solution. Excuse me for interrupting.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, so it sounds like we'll go ahead and refer this to your committee, Mr. Peterson, and if you guys can meet in the next 2-3 weeks, schedule a meeting, and then get this back on the agenda. With that,
I'm not on that committee, but I would like to be invited.
Well, Fred, give me back some feedback when you hear from Chuck.
Yeah, and bug me about it.
Okay.
okay, thank you.